I asked myself what it means to be one of the Dark Angels. Is it to hunt the fallen, chasing shadows through the dark places of the galaxy? Is it to pursue our quest at any expense, forgoing all other oaths and duties? Is it to lie, to hide, and to plot so that others will never know of our shame? Is it to keep our own brethren unacquainted with the truth of our past, the legacy we all share in? Or is it to be a space marine? Is it to follow the path laid down by the Emperor and Lionel Johnson at the founding of this great Imperium of man, to protect mankind, to purge the alien, cleanse the unclean? The Dark Angels, a powerful and secretive Space Marine chapter, are shrouded in mystery and fear. They are an interesting topic to discuss. Few Space Marine chapters fight with the grim determination of this chapter. Akin to the knightly orders of old Earth, Dark Angels value honour and secrecy as core tenets of their belief. Devoted and obsessed with righting past wrongs, the Dark Angels are equal parts an interesting and mysterious chapter. The first legion to emerge, the Dark Angels were the first sighting the galaxy saw of the Emperor's Astartes, beginning the spark of the legendary reputation and the vast mythology of the Space Marines. However, their earliest and possibly greatest battles can't be found in any historical documents inside the Imperium. Although each of the Astartes legions were dear to the Emperor and were some of his most important and long-lasting projects, the Dark Angels hold an elevated position in the ranks of the Astartes. Being the first legion, the Emperor used them as his prototype and template, helping shape what the Legion Astartes will come to be. Being pulled from the most stable out of all of his Primarchs and without any apparent genetic defects, they were the most suitable choice to begin the Emperor's plans. Being limited to Terra, these initial plans took time. With having limited access to gene stock, these first experiments took a toll on the human inhabitants of Earth during the Unification Wars, with thousands of people being used for the project but only producing a handful of Astartes, if any. At first, these test subjects were found in the children of the warlords and leaders of states opposing the Emperor on Terra. However, the flesh tithe was quickly implemented on conquered territory, quickly thinning the population of unmutated, pure strain humans. Some ancient historical texts also hint that the Emperor purchased slaves from the nomad slaver clans found scattered about on Terra during the War of Unification. Unlike the Dark Angels' fellow legions that would come later, they did not share an inherent culture with each other. With legions usually founding and recruiting from a singular planet, they usually share a set of beliefs, values and customs. This would usually shape their typical tactics of war, with the recruits of the First Legion being sourced from different regions with a diverse range of beliefs. This brought different battle doctrine, tactics and strategy into the fledgling legion. These first Astartes, barely a few hundred strong, were told to abandon their given names and take up new names of their own, taken from the heroes and myths of human history. Thus, Hercules, Gilgamesh, and other heroes strode into the battlefield of the Unification Wars. At this point, they did not function as a legion. Long before the name of the Dark Angels was adopted, they fought as small units attached to the armies of the Emperor, honing their battle doctrine while building the legend of the Legions Astartes. Due to their skill in battle, and in respect to the future they signified, the human forces began to refer to these units as Young Crowned Princes, or simply the Uncrowned. These early groups of Astartes would become known as hosts, forming the beginning of the squads that would later be reformed as wings. These groups experimented and adapted the battle doctrine from their cultures, forming many of the battle doctrines and strategies used by the later legions formed by the Emperor. This approach to testing tactics did cause these first Astartes to receive a relatively high amount of casualties. However, rather than harming the legion, this, quote unquote, thinned the weak, elevating the standard of the First Angels to a more elite level. The stratagems used by the Astartes were recorded and compiled to form the Principe Bellicosa, the standard battle doctrine used by the officers and leaders of the Imperial forces during the Great Crusade. After gaining a long list of victories and beginning to function in large forces, the Emperor was pleased with his Space Marines. It quickly became clear that the Thunder Warriors, the flawed Proto-Astartes, had become obsolete. The Emperor had reached his decision. It was time for him to replace his rabble of enraged and unruly Thunder Warriors with his lethal and disciplined Astartes. The Emperor gathered his First Legion and instructed them to purge the Thunder Warriors as they returned from a recent victory. The Thunder Warriors, expected to be welcomed with applause, found themselves slaughtered by a hail of bolts and plasma. This ambush eradicated most of the Thunder Warriors, with some survivors managing to escape for a time period, until they were subsequently hunted down by the First Legion. Now numbering over 10,000 strong, the First Legion began to function as a cohesive unit. In the year 668 M30, the First Legion would introduce itself to the wider Imperium at the Battle of Samarkand. Flanked by contingents from other legions, and led by the Emperor himself, the 10,000 Space Marines of the First Legion took to the field against 200,000 gene-forged Uduk-Hul, slave soldiers of the King of Akkad. The Uduk-Hul, boasting of enhanced strength and poisonous blood, had helped the King of Akkad resist the Emperor and the advance of his human armies. For 10 solar hours, the two forces met in a fierce conflict. Although outnumbered, the First Legion's training and steadfast resolve saw the Uduk-Hul grind against their disciplined ranks. After the 10th hour and the last Uduk-Hul was slain, Samarkand was in total ruin. The King of Akkad was slain and his head was taken as a trophy by the promoted Grandmaster Hector Frayne. Frayne, for his service to the Emperor, was named Sinestra of the Emperor, the most deadly weapon of the Emperor. The Astartes' potential now realised and demonstrated in the harshest battle seen on Terra, the Emperor diverted even more resources to the project, increasing the speed of the creation of the other legions. With this triumph, the Dark Angels had earned a renown among the Emperor's forces. Not only had they slaughtered a seemingly unbeatable foe, they returned without celebration or high spirits, just a continued dark determination to continue their work and service to the Emperor. This victory would set a trend we would see throughout the timeline of Warhammer 40k. From the Unification Wars, throughout the Great Crusade, and up to the current era, we see the First Legion pit against the deadliest foes the Imperium has to offer. During the last years of the Unification Wars, the Emperor would send the First Legion against his greatest enemies, with one aim for every battle: commit complete annihilation. Armed with some of the most powerful armaments and relics from the Emperor's armories, the Legion fought against a variety of threats. These threats, both human, Xenos, and chaos in nature, were struck from history with only brief mentions of battle honours showing any record of the battles. Leading from the front, Grandmaster Frayne was as ruthless as he was determined, bringing the full might of his legion against any foe he came across, using any weapon he deemed fit to end the enemies of the Emperor. It was during these times they would gain their first moniker for the Legion, the Angels of Death. Their brutal tactics sealed their reputation with both their enemies and the Emperor's forces, with many human forces fearing the sight of the Angels of Death, foregoing the Imperial truth by secretly placing wards and charms to protect from their bad luck. Any human forces attached to the operations of the First Legion often led to a grim end, facing horrific enemies on the front lines along with the Astartes. The First Legion saw this as something to be proud of rather than scorn. They saw themselves as above the lesser forces of the Emperor, adorning themselves with the icons of death and purposely exiling themselves from most interaction with other forces. They saw this not as their duty, but their honour, to protect the Imperial forces from horrors they were not fit to bear. The Master of the First Legion showed no interest in such slights, content to remain wreathed in malign rumour, as they fought the battles that could never be lauded, lest they break the minds of those who bore witness to their battle honours. For while the younger legions were granted the lesser honour of standing triumphant at the mundane victories of conquest, the First Legion would be awarded the great honour of acting as the Emperor's left hand, a brutally efficient weapon of grim aspect hidden behind the bright pageantry of the Imperial army. As the Unification Wars ended, and the Emperor focused on building the rest of the legions to full strength, the First Legion did not sit idle. They would stand vigil of the newly unified Sol system, scouring the Oort cloud of threats, and keeping a vigil on the borders of the system, stopping both Xenos and warp threats from entering the Emperor's new realm. For 10 solar years, they would hunt through the outer reaches of the Sol system, liberating outposts and destroying any threat they came across. To achieve this task, the Legion split into orders, formations that would see themselves specialise in distinct forms of combat and strategy. This is where the First Legion will build much of its rituals and beliefs in the crucible of this dark, defensive war. When called back to Terra to assemble at the head of the Great Crusade, they requested no greeting or fanfare, stoically returning to lead the other legions on the Great Crusade to save humanity and secure its place in the galaxy. Each Astartes of the First Legion, now a veteran of countless battles, stood apart from their other legions, for even the other legions showed them a degree of wary respect. The Emperor, after conducting a tithe of all advanced voidcraft around Terra, divided these amongst his legions. These ships were ancient relics and extremely powerful, the majority hailing from the Dark Age of technology. Each legion was granted a couple of ships. However, the Emperor gave his First Legion an entire fleet of these relic ships, but not as a gift or reward for service, as tools and weapons for the horrific battles to come. Unlike the other legions, the Angels of Death would make ready use of the forbidden tech of the Dark Age, unleashing gene phage and radwave weapons on any foe too dangerous to fight in open battle. The First Legion truly unleashed the Emperor's wrath, annihilating any foe that stood in their way. Sent to unleash the Emperor's wrath on the most deadly and horrifying enemies, few records remain of these battles. Scattered fragments of information provide glimpses of battles with swarming hive minds, technological abominations, and more horrors that defy comprehension. The secrecy of these battles has led to the First Legion's start to the Great Crusade seem rather tame, as officially they only brought a handful of worlds into compliance. However, despite their official honours not numbering the highest, they were acknowledged as the first among the other legions, being seen as the apex of the Astartes. This reputation would begin to hinder rather than aid the First Legion. Slowly, the reputation of the First Legion began to feed their ego, driving them to seek out ever more dangerous foes to challenge, ignoring many worlds and threats for the glory of facing these eldritch horrors. These battles began to whittle away the First Legion to numbers, with the high standards of recruitment also meaning only a trickle of new Space Marines were coming to bolster the First Legion ranks. The Emperor's Angels of Death were facing a stark dilemma. Their numbers were in a steady decline. Ever prideful, a new belief began to work its way through the Legion. They believed they had reached the apex of their battle doctrine, believing that they had no more to learn when it came to battle. They saw every casualty and loss as a removal of weakness in their Legion, and any victory was attributed to the perfection of combat. Tradition overtook innovation, and each order and host began to closely guard their particular knowledge and battle doctrine. They began to resent the other legions, hating how they received the same laurels and awards as the First Legion for lesser victories in the eyes of the Angels of Death. With their reduction in numbers, and other legions being reunited with their lost Primarchs, the First Legion began to see their superiority slowly lessen as the Ultramarines and Imperial Fists began to rival their numbers and power. The final blow to their pride would come on Canis Baelor. The First Legion would come across a Xenos on the planet relatively unknown, the Astartes believed they would be easy to deal with, and the Grandmaster Thrain committed a small force to an attack that was quickly overwhelmed. The Xenos utilised unseen before tactics and technology that defied logic. Insulted that his perfect record faced ruination, Thrain gathered the survivors of the attack and led a charge against the Xenos, carving a giant swathe of the Xenos. With his loyal men, he maintained the charge, slaying many of the aliens. However, no matter how valiant he charged and how skilled the warriors, Thrain couldn't overcome the numbers and the vile technology of the Xenos. Seeing the folly of his ways, Thrain ordered the retreat of his men and the retrieval of relic weaponry from the battlefield, while he stood alone as the rear guard, giving his own life so his loyal Astartes could escape. Thrain fell in battle. In retaliation, the First Legion turned the planet to ash from orbit. The loss of their Grandmaster rent open the small holes of the Legion and was close to completely tearing it apart. Each order believed that if their particular battle doctrine was adopted by Thrain in the battle, he would have met victory. The master of each order and host began to vie for power in the Legion, playing a political game into who would lead the Astartes. Organisation and effectiveness dropped drastically, and the Legion almost came to a complete halt. This upheaval was such a threat to the Legion that Malcador the Sigillite himself had to intervene. He strode into the chamber where the First Legion's master were holding one of their many debates and spoke to the Astartes. A fortress can be held upright by many pillars. Alone, they are nothing, but together they are mighty. Yet a fortress must have a master, or else its strength is for nothing. He said to them, with such might and such conviction that the words were carved into the very wall of that chamber. Malcador, instead of ordering the council to make a decision, nominated his own candidate to lead the Legion. To the shock of the Legion, Malcador didn't sponsor any of the masters of the hosts or orders, nor did he sponsor any of the famous heroes of the Legion. He chose Urien Vendrag, a grizzled captain of the First Legion. The logic behind this truly demonstrates how shrewd Malcador was. The masters, all vying for power and unable to accept the other orders' core combat doctrine as more capable than their own, wouldn't be able to accept another master as the Grandmaster. However, they could also put a warrior with no prior loyalties to any master would also prove themselves on the battlefield, utilising a range of strategy and doctrine. Urien Vendrag's first task was to unify the Legion once again. He believed the Legion had neglected the Great Crusade, and that the First Legion should take up their rightful place, leading the charge into the galaxy. Seeing how the First Legion was being pushed to the fringes of history due to their secrecy, he allowed Remembrancers to join the Legion and catalogue their deeds. Remembrancers were the first historians and arguably journalists of the Imperium, given the task by the Emperor to record the great deeds of the Crusade. With the Legion reunited, and the First Legion returning to the forefront of history, Urien began to look for an enemy worthy enough to deploy the Legion as a whole, fully uniting the brother in combat once again. Word reached Urien of a new threat facing the Crusade, a species known as the Rangda. First encountered by exploratory fleets, the Imperium was shocked by their technological advancement and the sheer numbers they could muster in battle, utilising advanced weaponry, personal shield generators, and countless slave armies. Out of all the battles and campaigns the First Legion were involved in, it is this intense fighting with the Rangda that intrigue Imperial scholars and historians the most. A huge veil of secrecy is cast over these actions, with little information making it outside of the campaigns. The First Legion gathered their full might for the assault on Advex Moors, a stronghold of the Rangda. With 50,000 Astartes and 100,000 Imperial troops in support, boarded on 100 capital class voidcraft, and anywhere between 200 and 1,000 support craft, all assembled to meet the Rangda head on. The Advex Moor system was an encompassed stronghold, with each of the 6 planets in the system being heavily fortified. What the Imperial commanders feared most was the reports of a moon-sized superweapon located in the system. Once fully armed and ready for attack, The fleet broke through into a real space, striking quickly and with the full force of their voidcraft. The Rangdan starships that could react to the surprise attack were quickly swept away in the barrage, but not without dealing damage with their perverse technology known as shadow blasters, ripping holes in the Imperial voidcraft and causing massive radiation damage to their crews. With the initial victory of the void battles, the 1st Legion Grandmaster led his forces in the assault on Advex Mors Extremis, the world that was least fortified in the system and was manned by slave warriors led by a single Rangdan warlord. Within 3 hours of planetfall, the Astartes had slaughtered the enslaved army, with the Grandmaster dealing the final blow by slaying the warlord in single combat. With a foothold in the system, the 1st Legion waged a campaign against the Rangda, and within a few months had captured 4 of the 6 planets. Now with supply lines and a reinvigorated army, the 1st Legion, with the Mechanicum and Imperial forces in support, poised to strike at the heart of Advex Mors Primus. This would see the start of the true battle against the Rangda, as the Xenos had pulled the majority of their strength on the planet and held their giant war moon in orbit. Grandmaster Vendrag devised a strategy where one chapter would strike at the war moon while the rest of the Imperial forces and Astartes will make planetfall and attack Primus. The Grandmaster, pleased with his strategy, launched their attack. However, the Rangda, now well versed in the Imperium's usual battle strategy, adopted a new strategy in the Void Battle. Their ships, instead of rushing headlong to counter the Imperial forces, formed a defensive formation around the artificial moon. The 2 fleets clashed in a grinding, desperate fight, forcing the 1st Legion into a war of attrition it could not afford. In the sheer amount of firepower let loose by both sides, even the most well fortified and shielded voidcraft was threatened. Both sides were taking casualties, however the Rangda had enough ships in reserve to hold off the Imperial forces. Both sides were stuck in a grim deadlock, until the brave crew of the Paradigm of Hate launched a last-ditch effort to sway the tide of battle. The ancient battleship charged directly into the Rangdan formations. Taking heavy damage while doing so, the crew rammed the moon with the relic battleship, gouging a massive rent in the moon's hull. The Astartes and humans aboard quickly set up defensive positions on the moon, while setting the warp and plasma cores to self-detonate. However, before the reactors could be fully overloaded, the Rangda would commit their warriors to battle with the surviving Astartes. This would see the first true direct combat between the Astartes and the Rangda, as all previous battles and skirmishes had been between the slave armies and the Imperium. To the shock of the 1st Legion, the Rangda were a match for their Astartes in both strength and ability. However, their vicious attack came too late, and the reactors reached critical, unleashing the power of a small sun on the moon, crippling the station. This brief respite allowed the remaining battleships to push through to orbit and began to unleash ground forces on the planet. Beginning as small skirmishes, the fighting was desperate, with Astartes taking many losses. But these casualties served a purpose. The Grandmaster now understood his enemy. Gathering a force of 30,000 Astartes, the Grandmaster led them into a battle, charging through their slave forces to meet the true Rangda forces in a brutal melee. Grandmaster Vendrag committed his forces, matching the 1st Legion swordsmanship against the vile technology and strength of the Rangda. The battle was a constant meat grinder. Caught in a stalemate, it looked as if both forces would completely annihilate each other, until Grandmaster Vendrag and the Rangdan leader met in a single combat, a vicious duel that lasted hours. Both leaders inflicting vicious wounds on each other. Eventually, the Astartes re-emerged with the head of his opponent in hand. The Rangda were broken. The rest of the Rangda escaped to hide in their fortresses, and over the next few months, the Astartes would lay siege and wipe out the Rangda while freeing the huge amount of human slaves in the system. Yet the cost of victory was staggering. 10,000 Astartes had been slain, with over 50 battleships lost in the vicious void battles. Although a great victory, the wider Imperium did not particularly applaud the Legion, seeing it as but one victory among many the Legions were currently bringing the Imperium. Ever determined to prove themselves as the first among the Astartes, the Grandmaster began to hunt for deadlier threats. This led him to join the siege of Carcassonne, a fortress world currently besieged by Roboute Guilliman and his Ultramarines, who had struggled making any progress on the world. Guilliman had opted for a safe strategy of laying siege to the fortress and starving them out, saving himself the casualties of a direct assault. On the arrival of the First Legion, the Primarch made it clear that his first strategy still stands, and that they would lead a protracted siege, expecting the Angels of Death to listen to his counsel. However, the warriors of the First Legion saw a chance to prove themselves to their brothers, and entered formation before the kilometre-high gates of Carcassonne. 10,000 Astartes fell into the gatehouse of the Great Wall, and managed to breach the wall, albeit with heavy losses. Forced by the First Legion reckless assault, the Ultramarines joined their assault, slowly taking ground in their usual methods of war. The vanguard, frustrated by the slow pace of the Ultramarines, left them behind, charging forward into the heart of the citadel, led by the Grandmaster Van Draag himself. In a final act of treachery by the non-compliant humans of Carcassonne, they detonated atomics, burying Van Draag and his loyal lifeguard in miles of rubble. With victory seized by the blood of the First Legion, and the sacrifice of their leader to take it, the First Legion expected Guilliman to applaud them and bestow them with honour, but no salute or celebration was held. The Primarch only offered these bitter words: "Vainglory is a poor strategist, for he renders triumph a bitter trophy and an empty prize. Today you have proven the strength of your legion, but not its wisdom." This united the legion even more. Feeling slighted and dishonoured, they sought out harder and more deadly enemies, looking to further prove themselves to all. Over the next stage of the Great Crusade, the First Legion took many victories, but at great cost, and the legion's number continued to thin. The First Legion was close to annihilation, scattered across the galaxy, hunting great foes. All signs pointed to the Angels of Death fighting themselves into extinction, until a change that would shape the Legion for the better. Now we need to go back along the timeline to the start of the Unification Wars, where during a key stage in the Primarch project, the Primarchs were flung through the warp to distant worlds. This particular Primarch we're going to focus on is Lionel Johnson, who found themselves on the feudal death world of Caliban. The world, covered by immense forests, was infested with mutated warp creatures due to its close location to the Eye of Terra. Johnson, merely an infant at this point, managed to survive in the forested wilds, away from any civilizations. The human inhabitants of the feudal world were defended by orders of knights, a ruling elite defending their people and servants from giant fortress monasteries. These knights wielded primitive bolt pistols and chainswords while donning basic power armour. However, despite these armaments and some hidden Dark Age technology, the world of Caliban maintained themselves as a pre-industrial civilization. Lionel Johnson, after spending many years in these forests, battling these warp creatures, would chance upon a hunting party of one of the knightly orders. Despite his immense power being one of the Primarchs, his childhood in the wilds of Caliban had moulded him into a grim and silent killer. The Lion was a calm, calculated hunter, learning to be opportunistic on when he fought, and when he did enter battle, he knew to show no mercy and to fight to the bitter death. A champion of this knightly order, named Luther, took the young Primarch under his wing, training him and imparting the name Lionel Johnson, meaning the lion, son of the forest, in their tongue. He was then trained in their ways of the order, learning the culture and scripture of the knights. Guided by the leaders of the knights and supported by Luther, the lion quickly rose through the ranks of the order. The world of Caliban was in a sorry state during this time. Warp beast attacks were on the rise, with even more fierce beasts of gigantic size emerging from the dark forest. The lion, proven as the best in their order, called upon his brothers to launch a crusade, a grand gathering to slay these beasts and finally rid Caliban of their pestilence. This call to crusade was met with great fervour, with many knightly orders pledging their assistance in this struggle, and thus, for the next decade, Knights of Caliban would wage a bitter war against a warped creature threatening their people. Lionel Johnson quickly became a legendary figure of this crusade, proving himself not only to his order, but to the orders who joined that he was one of their forefront knights on the Caliban. He was unafraid to speak his mind, and always fought where the battle was most heated and where he was in the greatest peril. After demonstrating his ability time and time again, the order began to pledge fealty to the Lion, following him as their warrior leader. One of his initial orders was to allow all people who showed combat prowess entry into the knightly orders, removing the strict law that only aristocratic elites could join. This created a wave of new recruits, swelling the ranks of the knights, allowing Lionel Johnson and his dear friend and advisor Luther to lead a renewed attack into the very heart of the Caliban forest, taking fire and sword to the lair of the beast, destroying the tangle of roots and branches in a desperate battle. With that victory, many grew wary, believing the war was over, but echoing his sons who were spread across the galaxy, the Lion knew to show no mercy and continue the war until the warped beasts were completely eradicated. The aristocratic elite of the planet, fearing the quick changes the Lion had made, rose up in rebellion, but were quickly put down by the grizzled veterans of the loyal orders. These elites were killed to the last man. Upon his return from the crusade, the Lion officially received the title of Grand Master, accepting the new rank without any fanfare. The Lion, ever withdrawn from his human comrades, failed to miss a changing in Luther. His fierce pride and loyalty soon changed to envy of the Primarch. Not long after his rise to power on Caliban, the psychically sensitive individuals on the planet began to have dreams of a great change on the horizon for Caliban and foretold a great figure descending upon the heavens. This prophecy quickly proved true, as the Emperor himself, after detecting the psychic energy of the Primarch, travelled to Caliban with a contingent of the First Legion. The Lion instantly felt a connection with the Master of Mankind, pledging his loyalty, and in return, the Emperor gifted him the First Legion. Seeing the contingent of his sons kneeling before him, he challenged the captain of the First Legion to a duel, pitting his steel against the power field of the Astartes power sword. After a short duel, he left the captain wounded, getting the measure of his legion, shocked how similar their values and personalities were to his own. Looking over the arrayed Astartes, glistening in black armour, he could only think of one name for them: Dark Angels. The Emperor in person came and inducted Caliban into the Imperium, ordering the clearing of the vast forests for industry that would serve the Imperium's crusade. Those knights, still opposed to the Lion and this new way of life, launched an attack on the Emperor, but were slaughtered to the last man by the Astartes. The Council of Masters of the newly renamed Dark Angels met the news with dissension. None doubted that the Lion was their Primarch, however different hosts had different feelings on the matter. Some met the news with pride and excitement, ready for their Primarch to lead them into glory, but a large group of Astartes met the news with shame and guilt, disheartened to present the Primarch a legion that was a shadow of its former self. Both groups, however, dived into their current campaigns and missions with greater determination, adamant that they would present battle trophies and war glory to their new leader. The Lion travelled with their Emperor to Terra to begin an advanced education from the Emperor. The First Legion contingent who accompanied the Emperor were left on Caliban and soon took up the task of testing the knights through a set of trials, examining who would be worthy recruits for the Legion. However, the knights underwent a massive change. Originally, the knight orders had varying beliefs and often fought and duelled over core tenets. The Astartes put a stop to this, proclaiming that all the knights united under the command of the First Legion. This drastic move caused massive dissension in the orders, with many originally rebelling against the order, until Lionel Johnson himself explained the great glory to be had fighting under the Emperor. This persuaded some, but not all. The Astartes had begun selecting which aspirants out of the Knight Orders would begin the Astartes trials, and the rest were quickly inducted into the Imperial Army. While this recruitment was ongoing, the surface of Caliban changed from a lush wilderness to a sprawling industrial planet, poised to manufacture and arm the First Legion. Out of the few knights selected to become the battle brothers of the First Legion, a portion of the knights were too old for the gene seed. These underwent different enhancement procedures, increasing their strength, stamina and reflexes, but they were not true Astartes. These did find it difficult coming to terms that the younger and less experienced squires now towered above them as pure Astartes and brothers of the First Legion. Luther, however, through skill and merit, retained his rank as advisor and second to Lionel Johnson. When it came to meeting his brothers, the other Primarchs found the Lion dark and arrogant, paying no heed to their counsel. Lionel Johnson could match any of his kin in combat, and even rival the strategists found in Roboute Guilliman. When it came to waging war and commanding forces, the Dark Angels Primarch knew no equal. Gathering first a host of Dark Angels from the original contingent sent to Caliban, the recruits of Caliban, and those chapters that sought the Primarch out, Lionel Johnson set on a quest to gather those of his sons who were scattered in perilous campaigns. The news of the Primarch approaching these scattered chapters did not warrant celebration, but renewed assaults and attacks, spurring the Astartes on to be able to present a victory to their Primarch. When encountering a new contingent of Dark Angels, the leader would be challenged to a duel by the Primarch, and after the Astartes was artfully defeated, solemn words will be spoken and short but powerful oaths will be said before the Primarch. Within a couple of years, the Lion had gathered the vast majority of his legion, with close to 100,000 warriors gathered before him. None could argue his prowess with the blade or his right to lead the First Legion. However, there was a degree of contention among the Astartes ranks. Lionel Johnson had wrought changes to the battle doctrine of the Dark Angels, combining the First Legion's doctrine with the battle strategy of the Knights of Caliban. Many of the Dark Angels' leadership quietly questioned these changes to the doctrine of their legion. With his legion gathered, he called the Council of Masters and the Preceptors' Conclave to a meeting. Here he challenged the ceremonial champion of the council to a duel. The duel lasted over an hour and became the talk of legend among the First Legion. After the masterful combat, the Lion, standing victorious, claimed the titles of Grandmaster, the Six Wings of Hegrameton, and High Preceptors of the Ordo Militant, the first warrior to ever claim and hold all three titles. And then, to the gathered Dark Angels, Lionel Johnson gave him his oath. "We are the Angels of Darkness. For us there is no peace, no end, but war and death. We shall not walk in the golden halls of mankind's future, but stand resolute in the shadows beyond. While we yet draw breath, this Imperium will not fall, and we will not know defeat. For I pledge every warrior, every drop of blood in the Legion, in the name of victory, no matter the cost." After this milestone in rejuvenating the Legion and proving himself to his sons, the Lion now began reorganising the tired structure of the Dark Angels. From the archaic structure of the hosts forged in the Unification Wars, the Primarch organised new formations named Wings, placing new leaderships in control. And the informal orders were brought into the official organisations of the Legion, instilling the style of the Caliban Knight Orders into the Dark Angels. During this time, more recruits from Caliban began to filter into the Legion, including Luther and the other knights who had gone through the dangerous alternative method of cybernetic and body augmentation. Through fair trials, the Lion made the Caliban Knights prove themselves to the Legion and based off their merit place them in corresponding positions. Paying no regard to seniority, younger knights often found themselves superior to previous order leaders. So this deep dive was a lot longer than I expected, but there's honestly so much about this legion I wanted to talk about. Let me know what you think of these longer videos below. Do you want these longer videos or before the shorter 12 to 13 minute videos? Don't forget to like and subscribe, it really does help the video guys. Thanks for watching as always. Ciao for now.